Small town redditors, what's the weirdest unsolved crime in your town, old or new? Nowhere near the scale of disappearing children or Nazi collaborators, but my hometown's biggest mystery is who keeps crapping in the holes at the golf course. Person has been doing it for more than 20 years. Every 2-3 months, there's a hole that's been shat in. Thank you for sharing this, having a nice laugh after all the murder and whatnot. So not exactly from a small town but is baffling. Happened this year. A man rented a room at a guest house. When he left, the host went to go prepare the room for the next occupant. The room was covered in blood. In the shower there was a chair with a pool of blood. It is assumed the person died in the chair. So the baffling part is that there is a camera trained in the room's door. The man entered and left alone without a speck of blood on him. The authorities assumed the blood belonged to a woman whose chopped up body was found in a nearby dam. Blood tests came back and it dosed. Maybe he was glass jar in butt guy. Where I grew up they found a dude who was buried under the cement in a building. No history or information about him. It's clear that he got into some deep trouble with someone. About 30 years ago, a refuse worker found the badly burned body of an 18-month-old boy amongst the bags and recycling. Forensics deduced that due to the condition of his liver he'd died less than a week before his body was found. Hospital and medical records were used to establish that nobody in the county was missing a child. He doesn't have a name on his gravestone. That's so sad. Poor lad must have had an awful life while alive. I found out my grandma played cards with the mob in a liquor store basement. I was reading a news article on a cold case from the former owner disappearing for an English assignment, and my grandma kinda just frowned. Told me she used to play cards with him and never paid his debts. I picture this little old lady in reading glasses playing blackjack with a group of men with Italian accents. 1973, my 4th grade buddy, Guy Heckle, disappeared during a Boy Scout camping trip. They found his coat. That was all. Not another clue after all these years. Man got kicked out of a bar 3 years ago this December and went missing. Nobody has come forward with tips at all. He went missing from a fairly busy part of town too. Kind of a strange one, but the whole potted plant supply at a nearby store, similar to Kroger, went missing a year back, and nobody knows what happened to them. This made me chuckle. It's sad, but in a thread full of horribly morbid things like lost children and dead bodies, an entire potted plants section just getting stolen is enough to make me laugh. Late 90s, a natural gas compressor station was built next door to me. Entire neighborhood protested it hard, but we were just dumb farmers, and gas companies have money. Shortly after it was built, in the middle of the night, it sprung a leak. Compressed gas spewed into the air like a geyser, and there was now a jet black cloud next door. Not that I could see much anyway at that hour. The sound it made was so loud, it would make a foghorn sound like a squeaky toy. Anyway, we evacuated, to the other side of town to some family and watched the news. Apparently it ended quickly enough. They estimated $13 million worth of natural gas was shot into the environment. So we go back. Reporters talk to my dad and stuff. Then 2 men show up, hand something to each news company, and everyone leaves immediately. My family and my neighbors are standing there like WTF. Where did the reporters go? Within the hour, it was no longer on the news. If you Google it, you'll find no trace of it. They just made that story disappear. I know someone who works in environmental cleanup. He said there are far more oil spills and leaks and things that could damage the environment than we are aware of, that never get reported on at all. Wit, nah, fricked up, yup, 100 feet from the house I lived in at the time a little boy was hit by a car in broad daylight. Killed him instantly. The town rallied and tried to find the person that did it for months. Was all over Facebook, newspapers. Had a $500K reward for information. Whole town knows who it was. Not even a question. Still set as an unsolved crime even though the person responsible had their truck washed and cleaned professionally and fixed by the local body shop. For the record, he is a judge, so yay. In my hometown there was a rich family who were rumored to have gotten their gains during World War II by working with the Japanese forces. They had large estates, mansions, and were just ridiculously rich. One day the entire family disappeared and their houses and most of their properties were either burned down, destroyed, or missing. No one knows where they went or if they are even alive. The most likely explanation was that they lost a lot of favors and money, so they either ran away or killed themselves deep in the mountains. They also left large amounts of land which were then given to either their previous owners or new owners. No other family member has returned, and this was about 30 years ago when it happened. A family of about 20 and they just disappeared overnight. Story from my grandpa. Small farm town Nebraska is in the 60s. A guy was found burnt alive in his car, hands wire tied to the steering wheel. It ruled as a suicide. Most of the town assumed that the guy owed gambling debts to some mob in Chicago or the like, and the guy wasn't exactly loved in the small town, so there was no real looking into it. IDK about Unsolved exactly, but my town was made famous by John Grisham, who wrote The Innocent Man. Basically, the cops got sick of investigating and pinned the crime on two guys who didn't do it. I haven't read the book or seen the show, so IDK if they know who actually did it. But yeah, Ada. Okay. Crappy town with shittier cops and the shittiest justice system. In 1999, two teenage girls left to go to a party, ended up in different town, called home to say they would be late, and never came home. The car was found the next day on the side of the road. Their bodies were in the trunk, both shot at point blank range. An arrest was made a couple years ago, but thanks to COVID, court cases are backlogged, so still waiting on that. They were a year younger than me, so needless to say it really stuck with me over the years. Police officer in 1930s responded to a call around midnight on Christmas Day. The wife woke up and he told her he'd be back, only that he had disappeared entirely and did not come home. The car was found abandoned with no indication of his whereabouts. The local theory is that he was murdered and his body was disposed of in the leather tanning factory. Perfect place to do it, honestly. Tanning is quite the process. Next town over from me, Kathy Page was murdered in May 1991 in Vida TX. Police totally screwed up the whole deal and the killer wasn't arrested. Years later, her dad started putting up billboards calling out the husband as her murderer and that the police are corrupt. There are still billboards there. If there's one thing I don't doubt, it's that Vida is corrupt. Worst town in SE, Texas. Back in 2001, a friend of my friend had been secretly chatting online with a guy from Canada. They had made plans to meet up in Windsor or Detroit. A few days later, her body was found dumped in the woods. After doing some digging, police got a hold of the Canadian guy. He said he went to meet her, but she never showed, so he assumed she had stood him up. His story checked out. One suspect was this co-worker, but a few months later he did a murder-suicide to his mom, so they could never get the truth out of him. It's been a cold case ever since. The murder-suicide highly suggests it was him. Good ole Belle Gunness. Only thing the town I'm from is known for. She was a serial killer in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. Would claim she was a wealthy widow looking for a husband. When interested men would arrive, she would murder them. Eventually families began to suspect her, so when authorities were closing in, she staged her death by killing her children and a maid, if I remember right. Then she burnt her farmhouse down and the maid's body was assumed to be Belle. Later, authorities realized she escaped when the skeleton they assumed was hers didn't match her recorded height. She got away and nobody ever found her again. It is interesting seeing the things they have on her at the Historical Society. Last I went, they still had the side of the shed with the hundreds of names of people that had come to see her farm after they excavated the bodies. Pretty recent, January this year. I'm in a village, so it's even smaller. I live right next to a river, and one day after rain my grandpa went searching for snails, but he found a head still with some flesh. A neighbor had also found an arm around the same time. The police were called. They found a body and a few dogs chewing on it, but it was in a bag hanging from a tree above the river. At first it was assumed it was from the big city thrown into the river, but no, it's hanging from the dang tree. The weirdest thing is that the woman was not from the village itself. Crazy. Many years ago, a house up the street from us burnt down. By the time firefighters got there, it was completely engulfed and a new home would have to end up being built. The man who lived there set it ablaze on purpose not long before going upstairs and shooting himself. Although his house was in complete destruction, with the fire yet to be put out, nobody expected him to be alive. This turned out to be true, but what they weren't expecting was that his body wasn't burned at all. The flames had avoided his body completely. It's unsolved because no one really knows why he killed himself or what the purpose was of burning down his house in the process. It's also a mystery as to how the fire didn't reach him. TLDR. Man killed himself after setting his home on fire, with no one knowing why. Maybe he was never in the fire. His body was placed there afterwards. OHHES. My family is from the small town where a prominent cult founder was born, a town of about 1,000. Back 25-30 years ago, my uncle was on city council when the cult came to town and offered boatloads of money to build a shrine and improve infrastructure. They didn't have the bad reputation at that point quite yet that they do now. The majority of city council was drooling over the cash, but my uncle 12 angry men aired the situation, seeing the writing on the wall that this was a step off a cliff to becoming overrun. One of the people he never convinced was the sheriff, but he still got his numbers. Unfortunately, he would receive harassing phone calls every night and would frequently have cars parked outside his house at odd hours. Everyone knows everyone, population 1,000. Remember, and these were not locals. It came to a head when his house got broken into and letters were left threatening my aunt and cousins, who were young children at the time. Status got involved, and the behavior immediately stopped. A few days later the cultists packed up and left. Officially, the threats and break-in were never solved, though every once in a while they would still get odd phone calls and blank letters in the mail. Yay, anthrax scare. Unofficially, everyone knows. A few years later my uncle and family moved out into the country, and all the harassment stopped. Probably too late to be seen, but my small town used to host a large bike race. Literally hundreds of cyclists riding around the park's 3/4 mile loop track. Maybe some road racing as well. Can't remember. Anyway, the large gathering required all the police force to be on hand, and with the jam of cars, bicycles, and people it was really hard to get in or out. A bank robber dressed in full cyclist gear came into a bank just a block away from the park, robbed them blind, and then hopped on his getaway bicycle and rode into the crowd at the park. By the time the police could respond, B was in the mix of people, and to this day no one has ever been charged. Perfect crime. Genius level crap. That person must be happy with themselves. 2 bodies were found on my island in SE Asia in the last 24 hours. One was found in the jungle after being there for a year in an apparent motorbike accident. The other washed up on the beach. A retired known criminal that did heists in the 80s and 90s, killed by one bullet in the back of his head, in his apartment on the main street. A silencer was used. It was at night. He died on his armchair. The crime was solved, but why it happened is still unknown. I live down the road from a small store. A guy walked in there, shot the girl behind the counter, and then himself. They were complete strangers to each other. It's been 4 years, and still no one knows why he did it. The road was renamed after her. This is the kind of crap that gets me. A complete stranger can just do something like that to you for no reason at all. Not exactly small town, but small compared to the region. There was a house that burned down 3 times in the span of a decade. I remember hearing lots of rumors about divorces and revenge, gang activity, being cursed. Not sure if it was ever solved. Not exactly my hometown, but it was a small town not far from where I grew up. Bardstown, KY. There have been a series of murders that have gone unsolved, which some have speculated may be connected. A young woman named Crystal Rogers went missing and was never found, not even her remains. A teacher and her daughter were found tied up and brutalized in their home. A police officer was ambushed and killed after his shift one night, and the father of Crystal Rogers was also shot and killed while out hunting. A lot of people accuse the police there of being corrupt, which may be accurate. I don't know, but Bardstown is a sketchy place for sure. In 2003 in my hometown, someone decided to burn down a playground. This was in a very small rural town. The nearest playground aside from that one was 15 miles away. This playground was decent size too. and I believe it was made possible by a donation from someone in town. It was mostly wood with rubberized mesh, steel bars, and large plastic slides. Nobody ever figured out who did it. Probably some teenagers fricking around with something and the fire spread. A girl in my town went missing and the cops just did nothing and refused to make an arrest despite the evidence. She had a shaky and very abusive relationship with her boyfriend. One night after they broke up again, he and his friend stopped by her and her parents' house, saying he wanted to talk to her in his car. She agreed and the three of them left. She hadn't been seen since, but her ex and his friend have been seen in town acting like nothing happened. Their parents reported her missing and stated that their daughter's ex and his friend were last seen with her. The police didn't make an arrest and didn't investigate. It's been many years. I can't tell how long, I estimate about 4 years or more. Rumors spread like they always do. Rumors of her being sold as a sex slave. Rumors of her being murdered and either being buried somewhere or fed to pigs. No one knows what really happened, except the ex and his friend. This year the friend was found dead with a gunshot to the head. The bullet went straight through. If I remember correctly, it was ruled as a murder, but the rumor of suicide has been going around. Some say that the ex shot the friend because the friend was gonna snitch due to guilt. I think the ex is arrested now for the murder of his friend, but I could be wrong. There is a $2,000 reward for anyone who finds the missing girl. The family just wants closure. I remember seeing the father's truck covered in his daughter's picture trying to get the word out there. Cindy Tig Rivera, if you are reading this, your parents haven't given up. I still see your signs plastered all over town. They miss you so much. I grew up in a small Midwestern town directly off an interstate. A convenience store worker right off the exit was shot and killed by some random person. Almost 20 years ago by now. The person escaped by exiting down the interstate right away, and nobody has ever been able to identify them. Sad. Plus, several customers came in after the shooting and walked away with free stuff because they couldn't see the dead woman behind the counter. They thought the store was abandoned. There was an old story that during Prohibition a big barrel showed up at the post office, addressed to someone no one knew. It was obviously filled with alcohol. When the time to pick up expired and it was still there, it was tapped to find whiskey inside. It was enjoyed by many, but when it was gone, it was still quite heavy. So they opened it up to discover a dead body. Corpse, flavored, whiskey. Back in 1903, a local woman poisoned many members of her family, including a baby over a few months. She served time and died but never really admit to a motive. One theory is that she really liked attending Irish funerals. Those dang Irish funeral enthusiasts. I live in Mexico, so my hometown has a lot of unsolved crimes. As an example, my great uncle was hacked to death at his ranch. Everyone knows why. Everyone knows who. No one will say anything for the foreseeable future. It's organized crime, if it weren't clear already. They never solved all those missing murdered women in Juarez. Every few years an arson burns building down. Last time was a couple years ago. I don't remember the full details, but they think it's one guy. Unfortunately, there are 2 unsolved missing children cases from the 90s here. They still put up signs and articles in the newspaper every year around the date the kids went missing. I don't think they're related, but who knows? Creepy. Every parent's worst nightmare. My cousin, TJ Davison, was abducted from a car in 1985 and has still yet to be found. He was 4 years old at the time. Decatur, ill. I'm so sorry. I hope your family is able to find some peace in spite of this. It's actually been solved now, but back when I lived in Wichita, we had a man going around, binding, torturing and killing his victims for decades. As a kid in the 80s, everyone was afraid of him. A few years back, he was finally caught. He was a church leader. You know him as a BTK killer. Associated with this, I was about 10 and was playing in the backyard with my friend. His sister, 16, was back there hanging clothes. A man wearing only pantyhose and another pair of pantyhose on his head jumped over the fence, looked at me, looked at the friend's sister and jumped the other fence. We were certain it was the BTK killer, and we swore we almost died. Police came and searched the neighborhood, but found nothing. Unfortunately, they also found Gary the neighbor's pot plants, though I liked Gary. He was like the cool stepdad to all the fatherless children in the neighborhood. He used to take my friend and I fishing, and he was always relaxed and cool. As I got older, I realized why. Free Gary. Just about the only unsolved crime in my town is the mystery of the missing bicycle. There were 2 reported stolen, but one owner found his. The other one, never to be seen again. True small town mystery. I've got a funny one. Not necessarily a crime, but it's still a good story. My town is small, only about 4-5k live here. It's one of those places where it feels like everyone knows everyone. Not a lot happens here either. However, on Halloween each year somebody steals all the jack-o'-lanterns from around town. Like, all of them. They might miss a few each year, but the vast majority are stolen. Nobody knows who it is, where they are from, or what they do with the pumpkins. The crazy part is, some of the elderly residents from my town all remember their jack-o'-lanterns disappearing when they were children as well, meaning it's been happening for at least 50 years. It's obviously Mr. Fishoda setting up a glorious pumpkin patch in his backyard. Around 1993, my teacher was shot while helping her best friend paint her house. Her husband's best friend claimed to have tripped with a hunting rifle going upstairs and shot her in the head. She survived a few weeks in ICU and passed away. Not long after, my teacher's husband and her best friend married. My mom was one of the first on scene, and there was a lot of evidence tampering already. Mom always believed it was murder, but it was recorded as an accidental shooting. A kid I went to school with did something similar a few years back, accidentally killing his wife. A documentary company contacted me asking if I could talk about how he was as a child because he and I were close in middle school. Not sure if Arlington, TX counts as small. I mean, it is smaller than Fort Worth and Dallas. But the one that stands out is 8-year-old Amber Hagerman's abduction and murder. She was out riding bikes and someone in a black pickup got her into his truck and took off. They found her body in a creek a few days later. And of course the water washed away any potential DNA evidence. It's been 26 years now and the killer hasn't been found. The Amber Alert is named for her. That's an alert that goes out whenever a child is abducted. Thanks for the info. As an Australian, I thought Amber Alert meant take caution with this alert. Not exactly a small town, but I live in a small city of 60,000-ish. Back in 1969, a 62-year-old man working at a convenience store was stocking beer during a morning shift. At around 8:16 am, he was shot from behind with a shotgun. However, no shells were found, possibly meaning it was a double barrel. Nothing was stolen from the body nor the cash register. The only witness was a young teenage boy who rode past the store on a bicycle at 8:10 am, who said he heard and saw nothing. The boy frequently stopped in that store for candy and sodas, but he didn't have any money that day and kept riding past. To this day, nobody knows who did it. There are no suspects, and zero evidence besides the dead body itself. However, it was later theorized that the man carried a gambling debt of a few $1,000s, to whom, we still do not know. The best part is that little boy eventually grew up to become the current police chief in the city, and still occasionally works on the case whenever the precinct gets a tip. That's like an alternate universe Batman origin. LOL. In the 60s, I think, there was a guy found in an old septic tank on an abandoned farm. My town has nicknamed him Septic Sam, and the killer will never be caught. This year, using advanced DNA forensic technology, they figured out who the victim was. Not my hometown, but in Mississippi. When I was there for a few years, this guy kept getting busted with dealing drugs and messing around with underage girls. Sorry, by underaged, I mean children. Anywho, the underage part was what the locals said, cause Mississippi, I guess. Anyway, he had money, good attorneys, and kept getting off. After the 5th or 6th arrest, he apparently swam across the Mississippi River to Louisiana, stole 180 pounds of Jane, and tried swimming back. He drowned. A few years ago, a man went into our local Catholic church, which is right next to their school, and tried to bomb it. He set it on fire and had placed charges all around the parking lot. They called in SWAT, everything. They had a negotiator outside for hours. School was also in session when this started, but luckily they got the kids out. Anyway, the man ended up killing himself and burning in the fire. We don't really know why he did it. IDK of that counts as unsolved, but it's the best I got. In the town I live in, they found a headless body in a duffel bag in the river 2 or 3 years ago. Never found the head, never released any more details about it. Everyone here will tell you, something happens here. We don't know what, but the police are zooming off here and there 24/7. And anytime a crime does occur they downplay it so it doesn't get on national news and bring down tourism numbers. There was a shooting at a store last year, with dozens of witnesses. Every witness says several shots were fired. The police said 3, then they said maybe only 1. Now they say no shots were fired at all and it was all hysteria. I'm not sure what's happening, but the police cover it up so that people keep coming to tour rural Appalachia. Rural Appalachia. Bigfoot keeps doing things and then paying off the cops. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.